In this video, we'll be talking about sales forecasting and inventory planning for Amazon businesses, for Amazon sellers. So if you always have inventory problem and you cannot plan properly, listen to the session, you might learn something. And our guest will be Nater Youngchild from D8a Driven company, which helps Amazon sellers we will hear soon what they help with. And before, I want to also mention that this session is sponsored by Getida and Awesome. Awesome is an Amazon FBA aggregator created by ex-Amazonians for Amazon sellers. So if you want to sell your Amazon brand, talk to them. They might acquire you, and you will find the link below to contact them. And Getida is a Amazon FBA auditing and reimbursement solution for Amazon sellers. They can help you to get money back, which you own, but Amazon is not telling about it to you, so they can help you to get money back from Amazon. Also, you'll find the link below to Getida and their offer as well. And now our guest is...
Let's get ready for Nater Youngchild at the KLIK Box Summit.
Hi, Nater. Happy to have you here today.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
So before we go into today's topic of inventory planning, could you please introduce yourself and tell us what you do in the Amazon space and how D8a Driven helps Amazon sellers?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm the CEO and co-founder of D8a Driven. My co-founder is Samar Parikh. We're both ex-Amazonians. Samar used to be the general manager of all of the consumable categories at Amazon, and I used to work within the supply chain and brand optimizations for Amazon's MVP brands. Today, we run D8a Driven. D8a Driven is a software and services company where we help Amazon sellers optimize for top-line growth, also help them improve profitability and optimize their advertising as well, of which sales forecasting and inventory planning is a very, very key piece.
And can you share with us a little bit what you will be sharing and teaching us today in your presentation?
Absolutely, yeah. So we're going to dive into what does it mean to do accurate sales forecasting, why it's difficult, and how to go about it and make it easier and more accurate. And from those hopefully more accurate sales forecasts, how do we then plan our inventory accordingly so that we can be optimized so that the Amazon algorithms are giving us the most potential at sales possible? And so we'll hit some key principles along the way for how to do that correctly.
Perfect. So we're ready to jump into your slides. And while you're preparing to show the slides, I wanted to mention that this video is part of the KLIK Box video series where we invited more than 20 different Amazon experts and software creators and service providers to share their knowledge with you. And each of them are putting something very valuable in the KLIK Box package, which you can find and read more about in the description of this video. This offer is will expire in a few weeks, so make sure that you act now. And I see that Nater is already ready, so let's do it.
Perfect. Thanks, Augustus. All right. So as we start to think about sales forecasting and inventory planning, I wanted to start us off with kind of why we should focus on it, or why does it matter? Because it's not necessarily obvious, and it can oftentimes be overlooked. It's definitely not the sexiest part of running an e-commerce business and an Amazon business. But when it comes to Amazon, it's absolutely the most important part. So in terms of why, ultimately our access to be able to grow faster, improve our own profitability, increase our marketing performance, and reducing our workload to manage the business all come from a more accurate sales forecast and a better use of our inventory planning. Amazon's largest expense is their supply chain operations. So Amazon housing your product, storing your product, moving it around in their fulfillment centers, getting it shipped out to the Amazon customer, oftentimes within the prime shipping window, no matter where they live. To accomplish all of that, this is Amazon's largest expense. And so within Amazon's exposure algorithms, whether it's search results or automation and personalization widgets where it says, we recommend for you, or customers who bought this also bought that. All of these exposure vehicles on Amazon are impacted by supply chain metrics. It's Amazon's way of running their business in a conscious way of being conscious of their largest expense. And so if we get this right, we can start to maximize some of our potential within those exposure vehicles on Amazon. Now, oftentimes when an Amazon seller thinks that they go out of stock on an item, or they don't plan their inventory perfectly, oftentimes they stop here. They think, okay, I wasn't available, so I lost my sale. But actually, the way the Amazon system works is, if for an Amazon seller we go out of stock of a particular ASIN or SKU, we absolutely lose the sale because we weren't there to capture that sale. In addition to that, though, we start to fall down a really vicious spiral where now all of a sudden our seller central account starts to become penalized within those Amazon algorithms because Amazon had demand that we couldn't help them fulfill. Subsequently, what happens is our seller central account starts to lose prioritization within Amazon's fulfillment centers. We lose the ability to win buy box. We lose our ranking within search and within search results. And thus we get fewer opportunities at sales. And those fewer opportunities at sales, the Amazon algorithms start to view our seller central account as not worthy of continued increased demand. And so we get access to even fewer and fewer sales. So long story short, it's a really vicious spiral down that we want to avoid. And we can avoid all of that when we have accurate sales forecasting and we plan our inventory accordingly. So sounds like what we need to do is really predict our sales as accurate as possible and then plan our inventory accordingly. So let's go into some of those principles. Before we go there, I wanted to pause and kind of call out why it can be difficult and why probably a lot of you Amazon sellers out there have struggled with this. We all do. And when I used to do it manually, it was really hard on me as well. And the reason it's hard when you do it manually is because there's a lot of data that you need to look at to actually predict your sales accurately. Some of that data can be difficult to extract, can be difficult to get for yourself to use in your evaluations. And really, it's a lot to do manually. And so we need some automation to help us do that at a larger scale. And in order to do that at a larger scale, it can be expensive to build. So it's difficult to do. So let's go into what is difficult and what options we have to kind of go after it. I have this call out here where Data Driven has a 93% accuracy of sales forecasting and inventory planning, and Amazon actually only has a 77% accuracy. And this is not to say that we have smarter people than Amazon. It's actually the exact opposite of that. Samar, my partner, used to sit on the team. There's an entire building at Amazon filled, entire building of experts. And the reason that those experts are not hitting accurate sales forecasting and inventory planning percentages is because the incentives are not aligned. An Amazon seller's incentive is to maximize their upside on the channel. Amazon's incentive is to minimize their downside. And there's a natural misalignment between incentives, and it results in anyone who's following Amazon's forecast and Amazon's inventory planning recommendations is going to constantly fall short because they're based on principles that protect Amazon's downside of carrying too much product across billions of SKUs with billions of transactions. And so one seller within that giant cog is going to constantly be behind the wheel because Amazon's system is intended to be built that way. I'll come to that piece a little bit later in the presentation as well. So what types of data do we want to look at when we're thinking about how can we predict sales? Before we go into any of the specifics, I wanted to kind of pause us and walk us through. There's really three types. We have our inputs, we have our outputs, and we have our competitive landscape data. So when we think of inputs, this is everything that as an Amazon seller, I'm giving to the system, whether it's what products am I going to sell? How many units am I going to put in their fulfillment center? What's my price? Outputs is how is the market responding to these inputs? So how many page views are my products getting? How many unit sales are happening off of each of those page views? What am I converting at? Are customers writing about my product? What do they write in my reviews? How do they rate my products? And then competitive landscape data is all about how is my product showcasing in the category that I'm in compared to the customer's other options. So what category am I in? What rank am I in that category? Have I broken into the top 10 in that category? What's my price per unit? What's my total ASP compared to my competitors? Is it more? Is it less? And so all of this data comes together in a dynamic way that helps us, as we look at all of that data, predict what's going to happen with our future sales. So what I brought here on the screen is what are some of these specific metrics at a glance. There's about 24 more into each of these categories, but these are the most impactful on predicting accurate sales forecasts. So when we think of inputs, the top metrics are: what's my average sale price? Did we have periodic shifts go up or down? My buy box win rates, my weeks of cover inventory position. We'll cover that here in a minute. My marketing impact, my promotions impact, my detail page quality. Is my digital shelf, does it have 6 images, A+ content, that sort of thing, which we can, I think KLIK Box Summit has some great speakers on some of those detail page quality factors. Some of the outputs are: do we have recent demand trends? Am I going up? Am I going down? Do I have historic seasonality? Did I do a lot of sales last Q4 versus the rest of the quarters of the year? What's happening with my conversion rates and page views? My average rating, and do I have any customers that are subscribed to my product? And within those subscriptions, do I see Amazon fulfilling a lot of those subscriptions, say in the 3rd week of every month? Again, all of the output data. So what is the market kind of pushing back and giving us as data as they interact with our product? And then on the competitive landscape front, we have category ranking. So where am I in the category? Do I have any of these top thresholds broken, whether it's top 100, top 10, top 3, or number 1 in a category? And also my advertising performance balance between offensive and defensive terms. So am I stealing share, or am I playing a lot of defense, protecting my own brand name? We'll go into an example of some of these, and we'll kind of talk about how it can be difficult to know which one of these metrics should I weigh more or less this week as I'm predicting sales. But before we go there, I wanted to pause. On the screen here, what we're looking at are different screenshots, probably of screens that everyone on viewing this video will have seen in their time managing an Amazon business. Ultimately, we're looking at this data in 2 different locations. On the left, we have inside of the Seller Central platform itself. And on the right, we have inside of the Amazon marketplace itself. And so all of this data lives in one of these 2 places. In the Seller Central platform, it lives in different places of reports you can download, or graphs you can look at, or tables you can look at, or reports you can schedule to be downloaded, but it's spread out throughout Seller Central. And then on the Amazon marketplace, we can see this data exists in different places, such as on the detail pages, or within our buy box. We see here that we don't have enough items, it's going out of stock. We can see how many other sellers are there, my ratings, my reviews, what category am I in, what's my ranking in that category. And so the data really exists in just 2 places, but spread out. And so what we want to do is find ways to how can we get all of that data into one place so that we can do some math to accurately plan our sales forecast. So here what I have is an example for us. This is a client brand of ours. This is one of their items this is the last week of August. And so what we're looking at is how can we look at this data and say, okay, we're going into September. Which of these key metrics should have the biggest impact on going into September as we look to predict our future sales in the month of September? So I'll pause and let everyone kind of take a look at the example in front of us. And what we have here is we have things like there was about 500 units sold last week, but that was almost 100% week over week growth. That seems like a pretty big deal. We see they were number 7 in the category, also about 100% week over week increase, which shows that they broke the top 10 in their category that week. Probably a pretty big impact to future sales. We can also see that based on the data, last September was their largest sales month of all months of the year. You see our conversion rate is improving quite a bit. We can also see of it as an input, our weeks of cover is going down. So we only have 2 weeks of cover left. So long story short, it's difficult to find out which one of these individual metrics is going to have the biggest impact to help us predict what should happen in sales next week. We can't just say, oh, 500 units, 100% week over week growth. So I'm going to assume another 500 units. We're going to have another 100% week over week growth. We have to look at a combination of all of these metrics combined, the input data, the output data, and the competitive landscape data to plan and predict our future sales as we head into the month of September. I brought this example up to showcase for us that that's difficult to do. And so now what we'll do is we'll kind of look at how can we do that and make it a little easier on ourselves. Before we talk about how we can make it easier though, ultimately predicting sales is only half the battle. After we predict sales, we still need to plan our inventory in accordance with those predictions. And so I'll pause here because it's really important that we really highlight that there's 4 key principles when it comes to planning inventory on Amazon as an Amazon seller that we want to maintain to optimize our Amazon seller business within Amazon's algorithms. The absolute number one key principle is a targeted weeks of cover. So weeks of cover means how many weeks of inventory do I have at Amazon, assuming a demand of X. So if we say our demand for ASIN A is 100 units, and if our target inventory weeks of cover is 4 to 6 weeks of cover, then we know we want to have 400 to 600 units spread out throughout Amazon's fulfillment centers. Amazon's system is built to always have about 1 month worth of inventory and sell through it during that month and be replenished. So they're constantly have enough to expand with growth, but not have too much. And also is in we move to number 2, which is storage fee management, which is if we can maintain this 4 to 6 weeks of cover, then in theory, we're never having any of our units at Amazon for more than a month. And thus we're not getting hit with any of those storage fees that Amazon charges when that Amazon charges per month that our product is there, which moves us to number 3. In order to maintain this, we typically need to get ourselves to a state where as an Amazon seller, we're sending in inventory to Amazon's fulfillment centers on a weekly cadence. And as we do that, that allows us to adapt our inventory send-ins according with our sales forecast changes. So our demand on week 1 in the month might be 100 units a week for that particular ASIN. And we might have done enough manipulating in the market through our advertising and our promotions that we've actually maybe got all the way to 200 units a week in demand by week 4 in that month. And so our weeks of cover changes because now our average demand changes. And so sending in weekly allows us to maintain that 4 to 6 weeks of cover. And lastly, the last principle when we think of planning inventory with Amazon that we want to be conscious of is SKU level optimizations. Most brands on Amazon, honestly, just about everyone I've ever seen, from really, really large CPG brands to small mom and pop shops to startup brands, and everyone in between with 1,000 SKUs, with 100 SKUs, or with 10 SKUs. Most Amazon sellers fall into the Pareto principle of 80-20. About 80% of their revenue comes from about 20% of their catalog. And there's some variance there, but it's a very typical principle. And so what that means is we need to be conscious of our 80-20 rule within our catalog as an Amazon seller so that we're optimizing our SKUs accordingly. So if 80% of our revenue is driven by 20% of our SKUs, then we want to make sure that those 20% SKUs, which we at Data Driven call our hero SKUs, we want to make sure that those SKUs are as perfect as possible when it comes to this inventory planning. At least we focus on them before we focus on the rest. And part of that reasoning is you'll probably find in working with Amazon that oftentimes, especially in Q4, Amazon doesn't necessarily have as much square footage as you might like to house your products. They might not accept all the products you want to sell in, or they might limit you, or they might say, hey, it's Q4 right now and we're charging way more in storage fees. And so it might caution you. So within that, what we do is we want to have the SKU level optimization. So we know our hero SKUs, the 20% of our catalog driving about 80% of our revenue, are optimized first, and then the rest of our catalog second. That way, in case we get capped on how much inventory we can send in, we've at least served the majority of our business, and our limitations hurt our minority, not our majority. This is a little screenshot from the data-driven software where ultimately what we're looking at is it's pretty simple data, but it becomes valuable when we put it on a screen on a map like this. So this data is just where does the customer live? What city are they in when they buy my product from Amazon? And so this is a client brand of ours that only puts inventory inside of fulfillment centers in the United States. That said, despite that, customers around the world can still go to Amazon.com and buy those products and pay an extra shipping fee to have them shipped to them. And so what we said is to this partner brand, hey, let's look at the data to see what region we should expand to next with Amazon. And so as we see from their data, a large concentration of customers in the United Kingdom have kind of shown that they're hand raisers in the market to say, hey, I'm willing to pay extra to have the product shipped from the US here. And so why don't we start there? And you follow the data in terms of where we expand within Amazon's additional regions. Again, using data to make those decisions about where to put inventory. So this is an example. These are two graphs. The bottom left one is a graph in our portal for our Vendor Central client. And then on the top right is a graph within Vendor Central for clients that don't sell on Seller Central, but they sell on Vendor Central. And I wanted to bring this up because it proves a point from before when I was mentioning how there's a misalignment between what Amazon's intending to do with their sales forecast and how they plan for inventory and how an Amazon seller should. So in the top right, we see Amazon's sales forecast for this vendor spiking, but then flatlining. And what you'll find is within almost every vendor, there's a flat line after the first 2 or 3 weeks of forecast from Amazon, and it often returns to zero. And then we see in the bottom left, this blue line is their actual customer sales, and the pink line or purple line is their actual purchase orders. In Vendor Central, they're making purchase orders instead of like Seller Central, where you get to choose how many units to send in. And so what we see is every week, Amazon is ordering products, just like I recommended we do as a Seller Central business. But we can see even when Amazon's in control of it, how volatile that can be. Above the consumer order line, below it, above it, below it. As we see a consumer order spike, we have massive spikes in Amazon stocking up, potentially too much. And then even though consumer orders flatlined, we see a decrease in a suboptimal ordering level, because this is really difficult to do. And even when Amazon's in control of it, it can be quite volatile and not handled properly. And so that's why when we think of what does this mean for us as a Seller Central business, it means we need to spend time on looking at what automation tools we can use to help us get really accurate sales forecasts. And then from those sales forecasts, we need to use those principles that I mentioned before around targeted weeks of cover, weekly send-ins, managing our storage fees, and SKU optimizations for our hero SKUs so that we don't fall into this volatility trap and that we can grow our business accordingly and maximize within Amazon's algorithms that prioritize optimal supply chain metrics. So what are our options when looking at how can we do this? Really, there's 3 options, right? I can do this manually. I can download a bunch of Excel spreadsheets. I can be caught up trying to find all this data and look at it internally. It's going to be cheap, but it's probably going to be inaccurate. It's going to be difficult to do. It's going to take a lot of time. Another option would be I can build some of this automation in-house, though building that can be expensive. It's going to require maintenance of whatever we build in-house. And oftentimes will require an expertise that is really difficult to have in-house in a dynamic way. And then the option that we recommend is to use automation software. There's good software out there today that can be cost-effective, can be very accurate, and ultimately easy to integrate. So it can step right into your systems that you use today for planning your Amazon businesses. This is a few case studies of work that we've done with brands at Data Driven. And we don't need to get into the details of these, but I just wanted to call out across each of these, we were tasked with 3 different things. In the case of the left, we had a very large CPG manufacturer that our goal was to grow top line. We needed revenue growth. In the middle, we have a smaller snack brand in the food category that needed to focus on profitability. As we see here, they had sales, but they had negative margin in that year. And so what we look to do is how can we focus on improving that margin so that they could be excited about the channel. And then lastly, we had a large global home decor brand that was looking to really have an impact on their advertising improvement. And interestingly enough, while accomplishing these 3 goals, in all 3 cases, the core fundamental principle of what we did to improve their business to achieve these goals was all based on supply chain improvements. It was all started as a focus on more accurate sales forecasting so that we can optimize our inventory planning, so that we can hit some of Amazon's key internal metrics, so that we can unlock the growth door, or so that we can optimize ourselves to decrease our costs so that we can improve bottom line growth. And lastly, so we can improve our advertising performance. Amazon has a choice of which impression to give a seller when you're paying for an impression through the search bar. And so when someone types in, black pen, if they wanted to buy this black pen on Amazon, Amazon knows that Nader might have a customer history of typing in a category term like black pen, looking at 2 products and buying one of them in the next 17 seconds. And it might know that Augustus has a history of looking at 50 black pens and reading all the reviews of all of them and maybe not making a choice for 3 months. And so Amazon's system can dispense those impressions, those higher likely to convert impressions or lower likely to convert impressions, as they so choose. And as they so choose is oftentimes very much heavily dependent on these supply chain optimizations. And so I have some watchouts here for us as we think about next steps as an Amazon seller. How do I go forward into this? Again, problem being it's very, very difficult. So the solution being maybe, again, doing it manually, building automation in-house, or using automation software. It's really important that we don't try and do it alone. It can be a lot to try and tackle by ourselves. We want to make sure that we're not using software that doesn't look at all of the factors that Amazon looks at that can get you true, accurate demand forecasts and subsequent inventory planning. A big watch out would be not even unlocking this at all. It's Amazon's top priority, and so it should be every Amazon seller's top priority as well. Weighing certain factors more than others, as we saw when we had that example, it can be difficult to look at factor X or factor Y and weigh it too much in our predictions. And so making sure that we're weighing those factors appropriately so that we get accurate forecasts. Keeping up with the changes at Amazon. There's a big change recently where Amazon went from A9 to A10 in terms of their search algorithms. And a big change that happened there was Amazon started to give more credit to ASINs that brought in traffic from outside sources. So when someone was coming from outside Amazon into a detail page, that ASIN was getting more credit in their search algorithms than it did before. So keeping up with those changes and planning around them. And also keeping up with the shifts in our competitive landscape. So whether that means we're fighting for a buy box with other sellers, or it means we own the buy box and we're fighting with other competitive products and fighting for customer demand. Understanding those shifts and how those shifts will have an impact on our sales forecasts and thus will have an impact on planning for inventory. And then lastly, the big one here is just a big watch out would be swinging the pendulum too drastically. Right. So we see brands sometimes, sellers come in and say, oh, I all of a sudden I broke the top 10 in the category. And so now I'm going to 10x my inventory position. That can be pretty dramatic, and it can show up as one of Amazon's input metrics like we talked about. And on that input metric, you're going to have way too many weeks of cover, and Amazon's not necessarily going to give you the same exposure that you were getting back when you had just broken it. And so not swinging that pendulum too drastically is very important as well. So Augustus, that's what I had for us today. I brought some emails up for us for folks in case anybody wants to reach out and chat further about their Amazon business and how we can help them look at sales forecasting.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And again, I want to mention that this session is part of the KLIK Box series, and Nater and D8a Driven Company, they are offering inside the KLIK Box. Check the link below for that package. But Nater, could you tell us more what you're offering for KLIK Box buyers? It's a 1 month access to your software. So what exactly does it do?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's 1 month free to our software. Within our software, what's happening is Amazon sellers get reports based off of their core functions of their business. So sales, marketing, operations, and finance. Within those reports, we're looking and identifying all the insights to help our Amazon seller understand what's happening in their business and what's driving it. So aside from those reports, every Monday morning, our clients come in and they get a spit out and an executive summary from last week, what happened to the business and what drove the business. And then ultimately, the real unique value proposition within the data-driven software is, even if you don't want to look at any of that, the real unique piece is we actually tell you what to do about it. So we give you a to-do list. Okay, this week, we saw this happen and we saw these outputs. So you know what? We want you to go do A, B, C, and D, or we should probably go do X, Y, and Z. And so the real focus that we put on is let's focus on the humans that actually have to action our Amazon business and what can we do that can have the biggest impact based off of looking at that data.
Yeah, I think we have a few questions, right, Lisette?
Yeah, let's go ahead. So the first question is how to plan inventory for the very first shipment for a new product.
Great question. The answer is it's very difficult, and you want to bet low, not high. So when you're first sending in a product, even if you just invented Fitbit, for example, and you know you're going to sell hundreds of millions of dollars of Fitbits on Amazon, your first shipment in, you want to estimate low. Most likely, you're not going to have very much square footage allocated to your seller account. And so you don't even have the opportunity to send in high. But typically what we like to do, depending on the product and the price range, somewhere between 10 units and 100 units. Again, slightly depends on if this is a $20 item or a $200 item and the size of the product, but usually somewhere between 10 units and 100 units makes sense. And then what we do is we start to get that output data. So the customers interact with the actual product. We get to see conversion rates, page views. Oh, the products are 10 units sold out in 2 days. And we start to use that data to define what our kind of average weekly demand could be. And then we start to optimize on that 4 to 6 weeks of cover that we talked about.
Okay, very good. Very nice. So can you share any tips for planning inventory for holiday time like Christmas?
Absolutely. Again, slightly nuanced description here, but if your products are have a low storage fee, sometimes the solution to your problem of Amazon really filling up during Q4 is to actually send in inventory ahead of time and be overstocked for 2 months as you go into the Q4 holiday before they shut down those allocations. So Amazon really starts to shut down in October and make it really hard. Not out of a tendency to try and penalize sellers. They just have a limited they just have limited space. And a lot of people trying to get products in to sell around the Christmas time. And so they have to start to cap that. So in some cases, it might make sense for your Amazon seller business to send in product ahead of Q4 and be overstocked and deal with some of those storage fees so that you're positioned. But then separate from that, ultimately the best way to manage your Amazon inventory planning for both Christmas and all year round is hitting those key metrics I said. If you are constantly having 4 to 6 weeks of cover, you're sending in weekly shipments, and you're prioritizing your best performing SKUs over your worst performing, then Amazon's system is going to see that and reward you accordingly. So when Amazon's system sees that you do those things I just mentioned, they're going to give you the allocation that you asked for. It's when you give them poor reason to trust you and poor reason to let you take up their square footage because of your metrics, the metrics you show of being overstocked or understocked or out of stocked, that's when it becomes hard on you. So being perfect year round is the best true way to tackle Christmas planning.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. So Rana is asking how much days Amazon is going to take your inventory from pickup to make it available for, I believe it's a small parcel delivery for Q4. So if you understand the question, then what would you say to that person?
Yeah, I think I'm following. So unfortunately, the time between your product, quote unquote, getting to Amazon and being ready to go out the door to customers is a dynamic number. It's in Amazon's best interest to make that number as small as possible. They want, as soon as the products can get to them, they want to be able to get it out to the customer. And they do their best to decrease that and increase the frequency of that. But ultimately, the answer to your question comes back to my comments earlier. If you're perfect year round, Amazon will prioritize you in front of the line of the people who don't maintain 4 to 6 weeks of cover, who don't send me inventory on a week-to-week basis. You will get prioritized and you'll be maximized to the best of their ability. But ultimately, it's a dynamic number based off of their capacity.
Okay, very nice. So Rana actually has another question as well. So if a product has average daily sale of 80 sales, then what is the best strategy to plan inventory for this product from China to Amazon available status?
Yeah, so, okay, we have daily of 80. So what is that on a week-to-week basis? So it's almost 100, so almost 700. So looking at like 600 units a week. So as I mentioned before, if it's 600 units a week is kind of our weekly average demand, then we want to have 4 to 6 weeks. So maybe 5 times 6. So maybe 3,000 units is what we want to have at all times. And we want to be sending in inventory every week to maintain those 3,000. But as our average daily or average weekly demand increases, that number needs to increase in accordance as well. And so the key is going to be weekly send-ins, monitoring when that 80 per day is changing and moving that number up. But right away, we probably start at around 3,000 units spread out throughout their fulfillment centers. Throughout their fulfillment centers. Okay,
very good. Thank you so much. So somebody is asking, is the storage fee connected with the size of the product?
Yep, it absolutely is. Ultimately, Amazon in the FBA and in the Seller Central world, Amazon makes its margin and the money it wants to make from its Amazon seller through its 15% of your retail price. That is where Amazon is able to drive the revenue and profitability they need to run their business. ultimately what they're doing with their storage fees and their fulfillment fees is it's a pass-through charge for them. Amazon is saying it costs me this much to store your product, or it costs me this much to take your product, store it, put it through my fulfillment center and get it to the end customer. And so they're just passing that cost straight in through. And so as you can imagine, if you had your own warehouse, it would cost you more to own that square footage, keep it warm, keep the lights on. And so their storage fees do tend to be changed based off of size. And there's some key sizes within that. I think a shoebox or smaller is a very significant shift between a shoebox or larger, for example. And then another really key dimension is your weight. So oftentimes Amazon will always make its prime promise to its customer, or at least do its absolute best to. And so if that means the only unit they have of your product is in Portland, Maine, and the person who bought it on prime delivery is in San Diego, California, Amazon will put that product on an airplane and get it all the way to San Diego to meet that prime customer promise. And so in order to do that, it can get quite costly. And so that's why you maintaining 4 to 6 weeks of inventory and having it spread out will probably make it so Amazon doesn't have to do that, and their storage fees will come down. But the big dimension for that is 5 pounds or less. When a product weighs more than 5 pounds, that's like the key threshold for Amazon's cost increasing pretty drastically when they have to do those air shipments.
Okay, very good insight. Okay, so how to deal with Amazon inventory restrictions?
Great question. If we look back to the fourth principle with inventory planning as an Amazon seller, it's that SKU rationalization or SKU prioritization. So this is understanding your hero SKUs. So within that 80-20 rule, so about 20% of your SKUs are probably representing about 80% of your revenue. And so really focusing on that 20%, Amazon will most likely give you enough allocation to have 4 to 6 weeks of cover of that 20%. It's after that 20% that it starts to get dicey, just especially when Amazon has limitations. And so focusing on that SKU rationalizations will help you have those restrictions impact your business the least amount possible. That's number one. Number two, the more time we spend always having 4 to 6 weeks of cover and sending in inventory on a week-to-week basis to maintain that, the higher the likelihood is that Amazon moves you up their queue of people, sellers experiencing less restrictions. And the more that we do not do that as an Amazon seller, the more we go down the queue and start to experience more and more of those restrictions. Because it's not a human on the other end making this decision. It's just they're just putting that restriction on this many cells in Excel or this many cells in Excel. And it's just a matter of where you listed in that Excel sheet. You want to be listed at the top so you don't get restricted. And you do that simply by having 4 to 6 weeks of cover at all times and sending in inventory on a week-to-week basis.
Okay, very good. Very nice. So let me see another question. So how can I check seasonality trends?
Great question. Ultimately, when we're talking about seasonality trends for our products, it's really just a historic look at what happened with my sales over the last 12 months. We look at 13 months, which always allows us to be 1 month ahead. So if we look back at our sales in the month of August versus the month of September, we might see that, I sold 5,000 units in August, and I might have sold 10,000 units in September. And so we don't necessarily need to know that rationality to act on it, right? Maybe it has something to do with back to school. Maybe last year, COVID actually really made a really funky back to school. So we might not need to make all those rationalizations. We just need to understand that in the data, the system saw me improve this much. And so we can make assumptions about that improvement happening this year as well.
Okay, very good. So what should I do if I see I run out of inventory, yet new shipment arrives in a week or two later?
Great question. This is a really tough spot to be in, right? Because you feel like you're just sitting on your hands. You have nothing that you can do. And really the answer is what you should do is act more proactively the next time. In this case, there's nothing you can do. There are certain unique cases of you can try and call the hotline and get the product brought into the fulfillment center faster. It's not very effective. I don't think it's a very wise use of anyone's time. Ultimately, what we need to do is we need to do a better job of maintaining 4 to 6 weeks of cover and sending in shipment every week. If we do that, we'll never run into this problem.
Okay.
I see one more question from Rana. He's asking if how to plan inventory when shipping from China. He's basically asking about considering the shipping lead time. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a little bit more nuanced because you're probably in those situations, if you don't have your own distribution center in the US or a place to store products, you're shipping it straight into Amazon fulfillment centers, which I believe is what Rana is asking here. It's going to be difficult to do that every week, right? That's probably not very feasible. And so in cases like that, we need to get a little bit nuanced in our approach. In those cases, ideally, if we can get to a once a month shipment, and we need to pad ourselves with probably more like a 6 to 8 weeks of cover that we ship in once a month. So that way we're having enough product for growth, but also not too overstocked so that we're going to start to experience storage fees that really kind of change the dynamics of our P&L. So in those cases, I would say trying to, if you can manage a shipment once a month and maintaining that 6 to 8 weeks of cover would be the ideal state for that type of business.
Perfect. Thank you very much. This is old question, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Nater, for this presentation, for answering the questions. And if someone wants to visit your website, it's datadriven.com. You have to get used to change 8 into the number, data-driven. And you provide software, but also different other services, right? How can you just repeat what you do and how you help?
Yeah, absolutely. So we help Amazon sellers grow their business, become more profitable, and optimize their advertising. We do so with our software and also have services as well for the brands that need help to actually execute the action that our software recommends.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Nater, and good luck in your business. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. And now I would like to invite you to watch other video where our guest Sophie Howard will show you a solution in case you have inventory which you cannot sell on Amazon. So they have a solution to get rid of your inventory and get a little bit of cash back.